Thank you very much. Fabian and I are really excited to be here to share our perspectives on building UX research culture in the enterprise. Even though our perspectives are a little bit different, me having worked mostly on the outside in an agency or as a contractor or a vendor or a partner or whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter, and Fabian working inside the enterprise, our hope is that there's some tips and tricks and tidbits that we're able to share that you can take away and start to use. So Fabian and I first met in 2013, and I kind of want to set this up just briefly so you have some context. I think it's important. And we were working in a scenario that's very similar, or that really kind of captures our talk here, where Fabian was a business analyst at Good Life Fitness, and my company had been hired as the external partner to rebuild their mobile application. And so since that time, we have continued working together, albeit mostly on community building in our home city of London, Ontario, building UX community and building project management community. And when we look at what it's like to build community, we're not often starting from scratch. We're not often starting net new. There are bits and pieces of the community that we wish to create that already exist. There are people that are doing things that align with what we're interested in. And the job in creating real community is to bring those things together, is to identify where they exist, to find them, and to start to build momentum. And doing it in a way that's purposeful, and you're aiming to actually build that community, which isn't that unlike understanding what it's like to create culture. Because unlike maybe a startup or a new business, large enterprise typically has an established culture. They have rituals, norms, behaviors, values, things that are both said and lived that have been around probably for a number of years. So if our objective is to create that UX culture, we almost have to reframe that and think, how can we understand the culture that exists in the enterprise and augment it? Or what things do we look for in culture that we can allow UX research to grow from? And if we think about it that way, it starts to frame it a little bit differently, particularly as an external partner. When you are external to an organization, you don't have the same opportunity to become part of the culture. It's nice to say that you feel like part of the team and that you are part of the team, but it's not the exact same thing. And you really need to be mindful and pay attention and say, well, since I'm not in that culture, but I really want to grow this UX component inside of here, I have to pay attention to things like formal mission and vision statements. That's where you may find some signifiers of the culture that you wish to grow UX research inside of. You may also find it in rules and policies. Now, of course, these things are really high level and, as I mentioned, quite formal. And not often, or not always, I guess, what the lived experience is like from a cultural perspective inside an enterprise. So what's being said in annual reports, or what's being said on a public website, or what lives on an intranet somewhere, may not actually be 100% representative of the culture that exists in the enterprise. And so you need to be, as an external partner who doesn't have the opportunity to kind of live that culture, you need to be aware of other things that you should look at. Don't just assume that because the business says it's this way, that it is that way, and then you can leverage that to try to grow the culture. Look at things like rituals and stories. So when you're interacting with the enterprise, the small team that you probably work with in the enterprise, how are meetings conducted? How is information shared? How does an approval process work? What is feedback like? All of those rituals will start to give you a hint as to what the culture is actually like. The same is true for stories. So when you're talking to people and you're really listening for these things, what are you hearing about how it is to be inside the enterprise? What do you hear about what it's like to work there? What do you hear about people who have been there for a while? Or what is said about the culture? Or what stories are told that can give you those hints that you need to say, oh, there's an opportunity there in that story that aligns really well with the value that UX research provides. And so I'm going to dig a little bit deeper in that particular story and see if maybe there's a related ritual or something, and then maybe that's attached to something that's a little more formal, and we can follow it that way. So in my experience, having worked with both startups and enterprise in product design and user research, I've noticed a few things that I think can help. And seeing an organization like 3M Canada, which is one I work with frequently, large enterprise, it's a department within a business unit within a large business within a global giant business. So it's the epitome of enterprise in a number of ways. And there are some things that I have seen there as UX research culture grows inside of an organization like that I think can really help. Some practical advice. And the first one is to pay attention to footholds. Don't try to think too far beyond what you're able to do. If we don't have a foothold, we can't take the next step. So things like, we want to establish a UX research cadence inside of this giant organization. Well, that's not really a foothold. That's a big step to take. And you need to focus on the things that will allow you to maybe take that step. And in my experience, that's usually more evaluative research. So things like usability testing or even usability audits, for example. The great thing about enterprise is that there's all kinds of things to evaluate. There's all kinds of products that exist. There's all kinds of websites. There's all kinds of things out there that need to be evaluated. And if you approach it from the perspective of an audit or something, which I know really isn't true research, but it can get there, you don't have to go through some of the processes that enterprise are, that they run by, that are a part of daily operation. So focusing on the footholds, look at the small victories that you can achieve, and then grow from there. But while you're doing that, you have to expose as many people to that work as possible. As I mentioned, when I'm working with a client, we're usually working with our small team and then a small team inside of a big enterprise. So we don't have access to all kinds of people. We don't work there every day. We're not seeing different people at lunchtime. We're not maybe engaged in some of the social activities that happen in a big business or any business. And so we have to be very purposeful in saying to our small team, you need to share what we found from this preliminary thing that we did. And if we share that, we all saw the benefit of that. If we share that, we're more likely to get buy-in. We're likely to see how that attaches to a lot of values inside the organization and where the organization is going, and we will get more of it. But if you limit that and lock that down and don't share that and aren't purposeful in doing that, you won't be able to move off of that foothold. You won't be able to take that next step. And so make sure that when you're communicating with the team that you're working with, allow them to share. Say, here's the recordings from this interview or this session. Please make these available to everybody and explain to them an interesting tidbit that you found. Or here's a link to a WebEx of a usability interview or usability test that we're doing. I encourage everybody who wants to participate and to watch and to ask questions after. So exposure is important. This is a big one, and this one's already been mentioned this morning, and I love that, is that especially when you're an external partner, and let's say we're hired for design and research work, it's easy for us to just focus on design and research work. It's easy for us to focus maybe just on the customer, which isn't a bad thing, but we cannot forget on the outside, because we're not a living part of the business, really, we cannot forget about the business. What's it trying to achieve? We have to express that we know and we've learned what the business is doing and how then the work that we're doing attaches to what the business is trying to do, sharing it with more people so that we can move on from that foothold. And finally, for me, it's about embracing the reality that you'll be replaced, or understanding that a big part of what you're doing should be a legacy. It shouldn't just be, I'm going to work on this 6-month contract, that's it. I hope maybe that we get to do this again, but I'm not sure. When you start to look at it, and if you really want to grow that culture in an enterprise or a client that you're working with, you have to think of your legacy. And the legacy isn't necessarily yours, but it's what you've done, the things you've learned as a collective. And when you approach it that way, you're better at documenting things. You're better at sharing things. We use Airtable, which has been mentioned this morning as well, to log that kind of information so that when questions and hypotheses come up again, we can refer to maybe what's stored in an Airtable somewhere that we helped create. And so when you know that going in, you approach it slightly differently. And I think it's important to really be aware of your legacy. You're providing value, and it's great, it's better if that value can live longer than you are able to work with any particular client, because these things are temporary. Temporary can mean 6 weeks, 6 months, 3 years, but there's always some finality to it. So I know that Fabian has an interesting perspective on the reality of being replaced and what that's like from working inside of the enterprise. So now Fabian's going to come up and offer his perspective.
Yeah, so while I agree with everything that Jonathan was saying, I think the last point is really where there's a lot of difference between an in-house and an agency perspective. I think one thing that's important to understand is that for a company to even hire someone internally, there's actually a lot of work and investment that goes alongside that. So I work for Great-West Life. We have $1.3 trillion under management, around 10,000 employees. So a company of our size, for them to create a new job position, there's a lot actually involved in this. There's HR trying to figure out, do we need this? There is a manager in a pre-existing group defending why we need this, why it has to be in this group versus another group, how it interacts, how it provides value. HR has to figure out what should we pay this person, what is their career path, what is their job grade. And that's usually actually what happens is that an agency such as ResIM might come into an organization to lay the groundwork, and then the company would then take the learnings and actually build their own discipline. And as I said, that this is really the difference from an in-house perspective, is that both on a micro level and a macro level, you do not want to be replaced. The whole point of being an employee, being a career employee in an enterprise, is that you yourself, from the micro level, the individual level, you want to be promoted, you want to build a career path, you're here to stay, likely if you're an enterprise company, in a full-time position. Same as the enterprise itself has put a lot of work and effort into creating this position, so they also don't want you to be replaced, they want you to succeed. You might have wondered, why do I have this strange accent? So I was born in Germany, actually, and I've lived there for 22 years, and came to something I didn't know, which was Ontario, Canada. Actually started in the Berlin startup scene, and have some unfortunate entrepreneurial tendencies ever since. So I've started a few companies. I'm still, if I don't run after my 2-year-old, I'm running my own company, besides being full-time, and I've worked for brands such as Siemens, some agencies, Good Life Fitness, London Life, Canada Life, Great-West Life. And then, yeah, I'm here to sort of talk about the inside, I guess. So I think one thing, even though this, I should say this with a German accent, it might be more effective, but semantics are very important, yeah? So the words, the words that you're using are actually very important. I should just have this whole talk done in this German accent. Is that, so you have to understand, so for example, a company of our size, we're around over 125 years. We have several locations. We act all over the globe and manage people's money, retirement saving, health benefits. So if you come into an organization as one out of 10,000, you have to know that semantics are important. So the word research and the word testing have certain connotations within the enterprise. And if you do not understand that, you will ultimately fail. Because one thing that I've learned the hard way is that I've said things like, oh, we really need to test this, and no one really cared. And I was like, why are people not excited? Because there is the understanding that we should test things, and I say I want to test it, but no one really wants to test it. It's because there's something called UAT, there's something called QA, there's all sorts of regression testing. So they think, okay, we already tested this like a bunch of times, why do you want to test it again? Same with research. I actually have a quant degree, and so I was when we talked about ethnography in my my younger days, I mean, I'm not too old yet, but like when I was younger than I'm now, I was like ethnography, like what's the point of that? Now, actually, I feel the other way around sometimes, but so you have to understand, if I say I want to do research in an enterprise, a company of our size, we would have paid panels of tens of thousands or sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. We have actuary science, where we predict certain elements over millions of people's lives, and I come here like, I want to talk to 5 people and like tell you super confidently that this is what we're supposed to do. I mean, it sounds kind of ridiculous. Also, the word research, in a sense, has a certain good and bad connotation. Like it can have a good connotation in the sense that people are excited about research, they want to get more data, but then it might be very frustrated with you because, again, it's not statistically significant often. It doesn't have a certain sample size. It doesn't take as long often in the enterprise. And on the other side of this too, it might have a negative connotation. If say I want to research, like, oh God, how long will this take? Like, will this take like a year, 2 years? So be careful about the words. Show, don't tell. So I think this sort of speaks for itself, but I will speak a little bit to it because that's why I'm standing here. So it's important to understand that, like, again, I'm 1 out of 10,000, right? I could like walk around and talk to every random employee about how I've seen the lights and it's called UX research and you should all follow me. It's very inefficient and probably won't make me a lot of friends. So it's important to show things. And there's a lot of complexity to this that we can't really cover in this time here. But what I mean by this is show it in the context of the team or person. So for example, we're very successful with customer journey mapping, communicating results to visual teams, because that's how they consume information. But it worked really well, and I took it to actuaries or financial people. They're like, oh, that's cute. Okay, let's move on. So they might be more expecting numbers. They might expect margin of errors. They might expect other data. So just be sure that you show things, but you show it not the way you want to show it, but the way people want to see it. And then another show word, show value and let others evangelize. What I mean by this is that it is absolutely critical, and Jonathan already talked to this, to show value very early on. And again, let others evangelize. Because I can, again, walk around saying, I found the light, please follow me, it's called UX research. It's not going to be as effective as when someone says that about you. And again, if you show value early on, you're going to have a lot of cheerleaders that will help you ultimately spread that vision that you're having. And so again, I can, which we have done, I can walk around and give presentations about, UX research has shown to have an ROI of 8,000%, and here's some graphics, and these companies are doing it too, and people are like, yeah, awesome, let's do it. And then it's not the same though if a team struggles with a problem, maybe they had a debate between 2 groups, I can go and talk to 5 people, 5 days later, they have finally data to back up their decisions. Then I showed value, and then they want to come back. And then they're going to talk, which happened in our case, they might talk to their manager, to the manager's managers, to their EVP, SVP. This can take 10 minutes until I'm the whole hierarchy. But then these AVPs or VPs or SVPs or EVPs might then talk on your behalf saying, we heard about this, we want to do this. And that's, again, a lot more powerful than me just walking around evangelizing things. And the other thing I want to talk about, so I was the first user researcher at London Live. And so London Live, Great West Life, Canada Life, we represent all these companies. Now we have a team of 3, and we also have 3 dedicated UX researchers and a couple of design research in our innovation team. And at the beginning, I was doing work. I'm not saying I don't do work anymore, but I don't do a lot of research work. So I would almost say, and this is a complete random number, so I'm not going to defend it. If there's questions why 80%, I won't be able to answer it, so please don't ask. But 80% of my time is spent on basically, marketing, promoting it now. Because even though now people see value and there's actually now more demand on our team than we sometimes can even handle, it's still important. There's always new people coming on. There's so many different products that we manage, so many different locations. It's still important to understand and to promote and to ultimately advocate to things, because there's a lot of complexities as you grow as well. And so I think one of the last things I want to say is it's important to make powerful friends and keep them informed. So one thing, I don't mean by like muscular people or people with like fancy titles or fancy suits or cars. I mean powerful in the sense of being powerful in the process that you're trying to hack ultimately. And what I mean by this is that, so for example, the compliance and legal teams, if you don't walk at their speed, again, if you come with a certain arrogance of like, I've seen the light, this is called UX research, I'm going to do it now, I don't need you, I'm just going to go out there and do it, it's not going to work very well for you, let me tell you. But if you are having comfortable conversations with them, and you're taking them along on the journey, and you're making these friends, then if there's concerns, maybe in other meetings that you're not there, you're not a part of, they can speak on your behalf because they're informed about what you do. And then so just quickly sharing the key takeaways here so we have some time for questions as well, maybe mainly about my accent, is that, so the 4 points are basically, I guess what we have been saying is share. So it's very important as much as possible to share. And it doesn't mean like sending out mass emails, but sharing it again in a sense that makes sense. And maybe in a, Facebook has done very well these research museums where you put up certain posters and people can walk around and experience research differently. There's journey maps, there's stats, there's all sorts of things, but just make sure you constantly are sharing, because to me, research, same as agile, innovation, some other forms are all about information radiation versus refrigeration. So you want to share it out. You don't want to keep it in some sort of fridge, which could be Confluence or internal wiki that no one ever goes to and no one will ever read it. And then the other thing is, again, what Jonathan was saying, establish footholds. Make sure you show value, you do things, and you don't like waste a lot of time planning your perfect methodology, statistically significant, whatever. No one's going to care if they don't see results. And then respect the culture. So again, the company I work for, we've been around for 125 years, have $1.3 trillion under management, manage very sensitive health data for millions of Canadians. We have done something right to get to this point. So even though you're super excited about this new thing called user research, respect the culture that's there, and respect if they're a little bit slower than you in adapting it, that there is a reason for this. There are valid reasons such as privacy concerns, data governance, and respect that, and then move at their speed, and it's going to be beautiful. On that note, if there's any questions, we can continue.